Welcome to Are We the Only Ones? I'm Kathy, and today I'm going to talk about grief. Now, what inspired me to talk about grief? Anderson Cooper has a podcast called Is That All There Is? And it's based on a song that him and his mom used to listen to right before she passed away. Like in her coming moments, in her coming days before she passed away, they were listening to that song. And a couple of reasons why that moved me was because Anderson Cooper's mom, Gloria Vanderbilt, was a former fashion designer, very famous for Gloria Vanderbilt jeans. What a lot of people don't know about her was that she also had a wedding dress line. And I actually ended up getting married in a Gloria Vanderbilt wedding gown after I had designed my own dress, but it was just a little too sexy. The one that I designed was just a little too sexy. So I ended up going to the store and getting a Gloria Vanderbilt strapless A-line tulle underlay wedding gown. One of the things that I happen to understand about grief that a lot of people don't is that I've gone through two of the most extreme, actually four extreme deaths. Two were my own children in utero, and two were the two most important matriarchs in my life. And prior to that, I had two suicides in my life of people that were parental figures that were very important to me. So I was 11, I believe, the first time that I experienced suicide in my life. And I remember not really being able to grieve that properly because my mom, it was one of her really good friends who had started out being a client. And this woman was, I used to babysit for her. And she taught me about like empowering yourself to like keep the money for yourself. I used to for some reason like give all my money to my parents that I would like earn. I don't know why. It was just like something they didn't tell me to do it. I just did it. But when I babysat for her, I told her, oh, just give the money to my mom. And she was like, absolutely not. This is your money. You earned this money. This is your money. And that was never just something that was like imparted on me. So I was kind of like, oh. And it was the first moment of having like a female empowerment moment and like female autonomy from another female that was not my own mom or someone in my own family. So that made it like some kind of extra special lesson. And so when she passed because she had a brain tumor, I didn't know I was going to Great America, which is a theme park in Santa Clara, California. And then I found out later that day that that was the day of her funeral. And so for some reason after that, I had this like weird connection. Like anytime somebody died, I wanted to go to like Disneyland. It was like the most like very compelling feeling. And that was like a weird connection that I'd held for a very long time. And I think even until this day, because when my mom passed, I was at Disneyland. Even that was also her favorite place. But I would go to Disneyland and try to be close to her because she was in Vietnam when she was, when we knew for 20 days that she was like slowly dying from COVID. And I would just be, on the phone. She was in a coma and we would watch her just like listen to music. And it was so painful. It was also so far away and I couldn't do anything. And I had also had a difficult relationship with my parents. I love my mom. My mom loved me. That was not really, the pain was not between us as much. It was between the distance that was caused between just like my dad and me. Like we love each other, but it's sometimes you just have difficult relationships. You can love people and not be able to communicate. You can love each other and like hurt each other, right? And sometimes it's best to like not be around each other, but you can still like every once in a while just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. Hey, I love you. Hey, I miss you. You have an open invite, but you just don't, you know. And So it created a lot of space. And there was also like things that had happened that were traumatic for me. And they just didn't know how to comfort me. And so it took a long, and I also have my own way of healing. So, and it could be because from when I was young, when two important people in my life committed suicide, I didn't really have like closure in the same way, or like I didn't get to go to their funerals because like either I just never got relayed the final information, um, or generally that's usually it. If I don't get relayed the final information, like where the funeral is, or and I can't go, then I can't make it, and then I don't have the closure that a person would have. But I don't think you really have closure from death because you always miss that person. If you love that person, you never have closure. The reality is that you miss them forever. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing to miss somebody forever. That means that the love that they gave you and that you shared between you was um, of like a divine nature because it lives on, right? So it doesn't end when they leave the earth, which means it's more like divine in that sense. And now, like, one of the other things, when my first really painful death experience that I actually I had to grieve when like, there's certain deaths where like you, um, they're outside of yourself enough that you can compartmentalize them and move on over months. Then there are deaths that you can't compartmentalize because they're like a piece of you. So generally somebody like your own child or your parent because they made you, or a grandparent because again, you were within a couple of generations of bloodline. So the closeness, like the reality is like you're close. That's just the reality. And what ends up happening, sometimes like you have a physiological response that you can't even control from the grief. So that's what I learned when I had the loss of my first baby was at 28 weeks, and he was a stillborn, and it was complicated because it was the same day that I had this like dream job interview at this very famous design house as like the dress design director was the position I was interviewing for. And, they didn't know I was pregnant. So when I came in for the interview, they were like, oh, okay, come on in. And we had a very quick interview. But what they didn't know was earlier, before I walked out, I had noticed like signs that there's something wrong with my pregnancy. And for you that don't know, it's usually like a dark spotting is a sign that something's very wrong. So you have to go to the hospital immediately. But I had this interview that was like for my dream job, and I really needed this job. And it was just my dream job. I was a couture designer. I wanted to do dresses, evening wear. I have worked in celebrity red carpet gowns, so this was my dream job, right? And my plan was to like have the baby, nannyfy, just nanny up, and go get. And if I had gotten that job, I was gonna just literally dive into that job and never look back. And the crazy thing was, there was something very meaningful about that all happening at one time. My lifelong dream collapses at the same time that like my oldest baby, my first experience with the baby, is also not gonna make it. And so what it did was also like mentally transform me in a way that I did not know. Because prior to that, I'm Gen X, so I'm a latchkey kid, and I grew up in a family where like they worked. Everybody in my town in Los Altos that I grew up with, whenever I still see them, like, oh, your parents always work so hard. You're the hard working parents. And so I had always prioritized that work would be before family. I mean, it's for family, but everything in my life for work, for my parents' work, for my husband's work, has always come before me. I've always put it ahead of myself. So if I have a job, I tend to also have this thing where I'm so professional, I will put it ahead of my own family. So in that moment, I realized when I had lost my baby, I'm in the hospital and I just left the interview. I'm in my interview clothes and I'm in the hospital, St. Luke's Roosevelt, New York City. And I find out that my baby doesn't have a heartbeat anymore. And I let out a scream because, of course, you're going to be sad because they can't find the heartbeat. And everybody's reacting a certain way. You can see in their faces and they're trying to get new ultrasound machines to see if they can, maybe the machine's broken. You're like, what? But then I was also aware of the other mothers in there and I didn't want to scare them and have that affect their babies. So I was trying not to be like loud in my sobbing, you know. So that was fine. The first moment that I actually had to be forced to like deal with grief, like real grief. That was the beginning. That's the waterfall. It, my baby was 28 weeks was the day that I literally on the day of the 28th week mark, which is the beginning of the third trimester. My baby was a full baby, right? Like by 28 weeks, your baby is fully formed, and you have dreams, you have hopes, you have plans that you have to mourn, and also you have a hormonal change because you have just given birth. My milk came in after my baby had passed, and I didn't have a baby to feed, and it was very hard to go through the because you relive the birth in the room, you relive like all the little moments. But the other thing you end up reliving is basically everything you did wrong in the pregnancy. You think of everything you possibly did wrong that was the thing that could have triggered this loss, and you beat yourself up over it. And what I had to do is I had to basically say, okay, I'm going to allow myself the remainder of the time that I would have gestated my baby, which is another 3 months, to cry it all out and get it all out. And hopefully at that point, I can compartmentalize after that. I also felt like my baby was also sort of like speaking to me and saying to me, like, Mommy, I don't want you to live like this. Because I felt like having grief and living in deep grief, I mean, it was real. I couldn't really get out of it anyway, but like living in it was also like a form of penance or sacrifice or almost like an offering to my baby to let him know how much I loved him was part of like the depth of grief that I would put myself into. Like really, I put myself into deep, deep grief. I did not leave my house for 3 months. I was in like literally shades drawn, dark, you know, watching sad movies, watching terribly sad movies. I had a friend visit and he was just like, you've been watching this movie, you watched it twice. It was this movie about this family that had like a 28-week-old baby that was born, but he was completely had a lot of problems. And so I was watching that. And my friend was like, you watch this movie back to back. He's like, you gotta stop. And then that was when I was, oh, is that bad? You know, like I didn't know. Well, I was trying to go deep. And then I thought, okay, I have a lot of love to give. So maybe I should go volunteer at like a NICU or something. And my husband was like, no, don't do that. And I was like, what? And he's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And I was like, I have so much love to give. So it's like a different mentality, right? I don't know. Maybe I understand. Maybe some women like don't do well in there. I would have been fine, but it's okay. Like in hindsight, I know I would have been fine, but I understand why people were like, my husband was like, maybe don't go to an EQ, you know? So then after that, yeah, I remember, here's the irony. On the due date that my baby was supposed to be born, I ended up meeting with my menswear model because he was in New York for the Bravo upfronts because he was on a reality show where he became like the villain, but he was a star. And so it was an interesting um, distraction to have him come over and not think about it. But he had no idea. He had no idea that had happened. And so that was a very interesting kind of weird turnaround. And it was not easy. It was extremely painful. But what it also did that particular grieving time, what was interesting to me was I had this transformation where I went from being somebody that was going to be a boss bitch that had like a corner office and it was going to be like in the fashion world in New York City. And I had that option to do again because once I lost my oldest, I could have just been childless moving forward, and I could have just gone and done that career. Because at this point, I think I had just filmed my reality show. Yes, I just filmed a reality show. And so I had enough professional sort of gravitas in that moment where I could like move around into just the regular corporate fashion world and be able to like, you know, do well. But what ended up happening was something unexpected. I ended up realizing that I really wanted to become a mom. And I also learned about myself that for me personally, I realized for me personally that the dream to have a career first over family was a lie because my body was only able to have a baby really, really well, like in my younger years. So then I realized like, having a child was a priority over getting a career back. So that was not something that like in the previous 37 years, because we had waited, we were married for 13 years before we even started like getting, into the idea of getting pregnant because we're very responsible. And so for me, it was a very different idea to be like, I want to have a baby. I'm going to actively try for a baby. We're going to actively be parents that are present and home. Like I transformed into a completely different person because that was not who I was at all. And even though that I realized what I had done was I realized I kind of like created a story in the 3 months that I was sort of like locked down, just hunkered in and just being like, all right, I'm going to think about this baby and I'm just going to think about what it all means. I'm going to live in the sadness, cry it all out, get it all out. So hopefully it wouldn't trigger me when I'm not ready. Now, actually, that didn't really work because after those 3 months, I ended up meeting with a friend who was a friend that was like a friend, but like a work fashion friend. But the problem was like, I knew that I didn't have like the same kind of like safety boundaries with this person. And this person was going to ask me about my loss. And I all of a sudden get off the subway and I start having a panic attack thinking about having to talk about this in public at a restaurant in like New York and like breaking down in tears. So I have a panic attack just thinking about it. And I'd never had a panic attack in my life prior to that, like a real one. Okay, so when people talk about, I have a panic attack, it's really funny colloquially to like talk about things like that. Like I'm OCD. Like my grandmother was actually OCD where she had to wash her hands 5 to 10 times and to the point where she had cracks in her skin because it was like so dry from the soap. That's OCD, like real OCD. So when I had a real panic attack where literally your chest starts to get tight, like you feel almost like itchy chest, but it's a tightening. And then you feel like you can't breathe and you feel like you're gonna have a heart attack. And I felt like I was gonna faint. So I had to sit down. And the scary thing is my husband was on the subway when he sees me off and he sees me have this panic attack and almost like pass out. So he was definitely like concerned. But I made it to see that person and then we ended up not going to a restaurant, but talking about it inside their apartment. So it was good in terms of learning that grief is more powerful than your own, I think, like will to pretend it's not there. You can do it for a long time, but it will like it's not like it'll like just trigger you to cry. That's not what I'm talking about. It will do something to you. It will physically stop you at some point. You will literally like I had a panic attack, like, and I tried to deal with it. So I can only imagine what would have happened if I hadn't tried to deal with it. And then like had a panic attack with no like previous grieving would have been, I mean, I probably would have had to go to the hospital at that level. It was very intense. I have not had one since then, except for when I rode on the Avatar ride in Florida and I thought I was going to drown. I had a panic attack there on the flight of passage. Good ride, but anyway. I digress. So I ended up on Clubhouse talking about this one time, and it was a really good discussion because there was a lot of people that hadn't gone through infant loss and talked about it in this way. So that was my entree to like really grieving where you can't escape it. Like you physically cannot escape it. No, it was because he was part of me physically. But there was like this other thing that I like learned that I transformed into a different person too, because then I realized I had this growth where I believed that my my baby that was conceived but did not make it was sent here to me to teach me what it meant to be a good mom and to transform me into the mother that I was supposed to be instead of this mother that was like a badass boss bitch in a corner office in New York, you know, with nannies. And so when I told the hospital provides like a counseling kind of follow up, when I told that counselor when I did the call for the follow up, I think it was like a week later, 2 weeks later, and she said I was the healthiest person that she had ever heard coming out of that situation. It was the healthiest mindset. It was the healthiest response. And so I felt like, okay, so like it's like I'm okay. Like I can go forward without having to necessarily go to counseling. And I didn't. But I I realized later, I think it took about 2 years before I ended up where, so what happened was then I had my eldest was my first rainbow baby. He made it. And then my third pregnancy was a girl, and she had trisomy 13, which is the worst of the trisomies. It's like where the brain doesn't divide, the esophagus doesn't work, the lungs don't work, organs don't work, and you have like 11 fingers, 11 toes, a cleft palate, and no possible options for surgery. So those babies always either starve to death or they suffocate to death because you can't operate and you can't help them. So I had put away money in my health savings account to have a private hospital room because we had the first one where my first loss. We didn't have a private hospital room and we had to share the room and people were very loud and like the curtain that's like they have a curtain right there. It's like literally it's like in the difference of space in between you and the other mom is like 3 centimeters. It's like really not. So you hear everything. So after that we decided to only do private rooms. So I put away, I think it was like I believe it was $1,800 per night. So we put away for 2 nights. I think it was $3,600 that we put away in this health benefit account. But you can't take it back out. So when our third pregnancy didn't make it, um, we had all that money. So then my husband said, "Why don't you go to a therapist? Like we have this money, just use it, or else we'll lose it." So then I go to an actual therapist, and what I found was so interesting. I only needed one session. I went until all the money was spent. But it was the first session that made me realize, like, okay, I definitely needed to go. And what happened was I had been carrying the weight of what did I do wrong? How did I, what was the cause? What did I eat? Did I go in the jacuzzi? Did I go in x-ray? I went on a plane, went through the x-ray. Should I have told them? You know, all these, you run through all these things. And that day I went to therapy and I told my story about, you know, what got me there, what happened, and I said to her, I'm happy to be medicated. You know, tell me what's wrong with me. I'm happy to come back and do as much as I need. How many sessions? Happy to take medication. Tell me whatever. And she said to me, "Oh no, I don't. I mean, I've only had one session with you, but as far as I can tell, you don't need therapy." And you know, it's weird for me to say that. So you should always, you know, it's always like a car. Therapy is good to go in annual checkup, get a tune up, but you don't need regular therapy based on my session with you. And I was like, okay. I'm like, do you mind if I just keep coming back until I get spend this money? And she goes, no, that's fine. Like we can just, you know, and I was like, okay, cool. But she's like, but you don't need regular therapy. And I was like, okay. And you definitely don't need medication. I'm like, okay, great. And when I left the threshold of that office, I literally felt this weight lift off my shoulders and like fly away. And I had like looked up to heaven because I could physically feel this thing that obviously wasn't there, but I physically felt it. And I thought, oh, that's so weird. And then I realized, oh, that's what therapy's for. It's the real manifestation of that weight being lifted off of you. So you can deal with it on your own. That'll work. But there is something different about therapy, like official in the office with the doctor therapy that does something for you that you can't explain. It just happens. And I didn't necessarily even need it, but it did it and it worked for me and I thought it was good. So I highly recommend just like one session. Sometimes if you have to pay out of pocket, it's like $250 for that 1 hour. But if you have insurance, you can do it that way. But really, if you've been holding on to something, one session, it can take one session and you'll be done with it and it will be gone. And you like talk about it completely differently. It's more like you learn how to reframe. I already reframed it, so that's why they were like, oh, you've already done, you've gotten to the finish line. Essentially, is what I was kind of understanding what they were trying to say. But I still could feel there was the physiological manifestation of the grief and the pain that sits on you, and then it gets removed because you went to the doctor, which makes sense. And so I highly recommend that, but also just understanding that like grief is one of those things that is one of the strongest human emotions and processes that we have. And you don't want to run from it because it's actual function that we need. Just like when we go to the, I know it's kind of, but like you have to sweat your toxins out. You have to go to the bathroom. You have to excise any mental toxicity that you've had from being hurt by other people, things that you've done yourself that you feel bad about, any of those things. You should go and sort of like excise that out by going to a therapist. And then it helps you grieve in the future too, because what happens is that you can tell other people and it helps you process your grief by helping other people process their grief too. That's one of the other things that I learned and all of that, because I created I ended up naming us the Angel Moms, but I created this like network of women that we all met on, it was called Baby Center was the original website, where they had like a loss area for women that had it in the second or third trimester losses. And we met on there, and then we formed a separate group off there, and we became online friends. And I found that having a community of people that you could talk to, because this is before the silence was broken. It used to be very taboo. So before this movie Return to Zero, that we all were sort of a part of in a way, because some of us actually donated to help finish the film. It helped break the silence so that women could start talking about infant loss, miscarriage, all of that, because before that it was considered like very taboo, in the sense where like if you talked about it and you're a woman, like everybody thought you were crazy, like you're batshit crazy if you talked about it. And I remember going through and going, hold the fuck on. This patriarchal society fucking sucks. How could I be crazy because I'm mourning the loss of a baby? You're the crazy ones because you're thinking I'm crazy for mourning the loss of a baby. Like, the fuck you talking about? So there's so many things that, when you're able to, and I had the privilege of being able to grieve because my husband was working and he was able to help at that time. But grief is one of those things, it's forever. Like, another example is, so those were my children that I had to grieve. And I thought that was the worst possible type of grief that I would ever have to experience. But losing a parent and a grandparent that you really care about, that was a whole nother level. So I'm going to talk about that in my next one, because I'm hitting almost like 30 minutes now. So tell me what you think about this. This is also like a mini series about grief. And if you have someone that you know that has suffered infant loss or miscarriage and they haven't been able to grieve, maybe share this episode with them. And for those of you that have friends and don't know how to comfort them, let me give you a tip. Do not send flowers, because flowers die. I was fine with flowers, but a lot of people aren't. Maybe baby showers for some people aren't really great to be invited to. But definitely call and just sit and ask them what the name of the baby was so that they can say the name of their baby, so that they can speak that name into existence. And someone can recognize, as long as some people recognize that that baby exists, that's really that's like the greatest gift that you can give to someone who's mourning their loss, and let them talk about it. Um, bring food, bring comforting food. If they smoke weed, bring a lot of weed. If they drink, don't bring champagne, you know, but just like, how can I be there for you? What can I do? And that's the best thing you can do. All right. So until next time, if you have any questions, or if you want to feedback, or if you even want to have somebody who's going through this connect with me, have them reach out to me, because believe me, I didn't just suffer one. I had to deliver a stillborn, and I had to deal with having an abortion because I didn't want my third baby, who was a girl, to suffer. So I've been through a lot of the gamut of it. So if you have anybody that you need to talk to about it, happy to talk to you. Happy to talk to them. Hit me up. All right. Until next time.